Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Quitcast. My name is Becca Syme. I'm an author success coach, and I've coached more than 6,000 individual authors. And part of the benefit of having coached at volume like that is being able to see the bigger picture of how things happen in author platforms or in author careers. And part of what I want to do on this quick cast is to talk about what those patterns mean. When I see something that very clearly has a pattern, that it emerges over time. And again, like the coaching of thousands of people is really important here because I am specifically looking for things that large numbers of authors have in common that feels predictable to be able to tell you who are watching and listening to this that there is an element of predictability to whatever it is that we're discussing, right? It's why we do a lot of question the premise episodes on this quick cast. It's why we talk about personality predictability. It's why we talk about the Enneagram and strengths, because when you can see that there's a big enough picture reason for a particular pattern to hold, for something to be happening in a certain way, then it's easier for you to have choice architecture that makes you feel secure about the decisions that you're making. And ultimately, and I talk about this a lot, if you can't see the video behind me, there's a little silver plaque that says author for life with a little hashtag, because that is my ultimate goal in doing content for authors, is to be able to provide security for us to be able to do this job for our lifetime. That is my goal. And so much of what is out there in terms of content that's produced for authors is either telling you what a person has done that has worked for them, and that is most of the content that's out there, or making assumptions based on other industries that things should work in this way because it works for, let's say, email marketing, or it works for marketing, or it works for social media, or works for whatever, and making assumptions about what should work for authors. But what I do when I coach people is I'm looking for very specific patterns. So as we launch into this series that I'm going to do on platform growth engines, and I've talked a little bit about this in previous episodes, and then I also did a vertical platforms episode almost 2 years ago now, I think, or a year and a half ago. And I will link to that in the show notes so that you can have that. But the purpose of talking about the way that author platforms grow, which is the purpose of talking about vertical platforms, is to be able to say, when you are trying to make decisions about whether or not to say yes or no to certain growth tactics, and specifically visibility and discovery tactics, that you should know there are certain things that are more likely to deliver results. And the fact that you're not seeing results from particular growth tactics that you're doing may not actually be an indicator that you're doing anything wrong. It may be an indicator that the market is saturated. It may be an indicator that we need to move along and try and get through the period of saturation, or the period as we go through the end of the gold rush phase, right? There are just going to be transitions and changes in the market, and that means visibility and discoverability change, tactics change. So when we have to adapt, what I want us to do is adapt with a particular strategy in mind. And some of you are going to fake your way into this in terms of like you've just thrown spaghetti at the wall over and over again and you figured out what works. That is also a valid life choice. I think if you would rather not be too conscious of what you're doing, you'd rather let things unfold and happen, and you just want to make choices in your author career, then that's fine. You can do that. You're going to end up at the same place anyway, though, assuming that you're not just doing things that don't work. Because here's my assumption when I'm coaching people and trying to look for the patterns underneath why particular things work or don't work, why platforms grow or don't grow, I'm looking for the actual why. So the intro to this podcast used to be, this is the Quitcast for authors, right? It used to be anyone can tell you what worked for them, and they can say it might not work for you, but they can't tell you why. I can tell you why. And the reason I can do that is because I have become an expert in systems of author success, specifically things that produce consistent success for people. And when you are a person who doesn't see systems easily or naturally, or when you are a single cause oriented person, right, where you think if I do this, then this will happen. So X produces Y always. There are a lot of us who would just prefer it if X always produced Y, and if I did this, it would always yield this. And there are very few things in this career that actually function that way. There are very few things apart from like when I hit publish on my Amazon KDP, let's say the book actually goes live. There are some things like that that are predictable. When I hit send on an email, the email actually sends. But again, even those things can be unpredictable. But there are other, apart from things that are under your control, like did I hit publish? Did I hit send? Did I put up a post? None of the outcomes are under our control. None of them are. And the reason that I want to start with that bad news, I guess, is that so many of us are trying to make correct decisions based on, I want to get this outcome, I want to get this outcome. And the reason I do things like talk about author platform growth and specifically in what causes author platform growth is to say, you may hit publish a couple times, several times, many times before you actually have a book that sells well. Because the way that books sell in this industry are extremely unpredictable because they rely on our ability to get visibility and discoverability from readers, which because of saturation is not easy, right? So if what we're looking for is the easy path, that's often not available to us. The only path available to most of us is the harder path. But when most of us hit resistance like that, when I post things and people aren't listening, when I publish things and people aren't watching, when I do tactics and they don't work, right? We get so discouraged because we think if I do X, the Y will happen. And we don't understand the largeness of the system of publishing. And we do try to deconstruct the system of publishing enough around here to give you a sense for, should I keep going? Should I keep trying? And I think what I'm trying to do in talking about platform growth engines is to say there are certain tactics that you can try to execute that if you have, let's say the four platforms are Respawn and Laboratory, which are both content-based platforms. So I'm producing content. Superstar platform, which is about a person, and then a sandbox platform, which is about a world or a set of characters. So those are the four different engines that can create growth in a platform for an author. So when I am looking for discoverability and visibility, if I'm relying too much on tactics that feed a superstar platform, but I actually have a content growth engine, which are the Respawn and the Laboratory. So if I have a content focused engine where all readers want from me is the content. And that's what's going to continue to grow my platform. I continue to bring new readers in, but I'm constantly trying to make myself grow like a superstar or like a sandbox. Then I'm wasting my time trying to make that happen because that's not what grows a laboratory or a Respawn growth engine, right? So, what is the engine inside of your platform you don't have control over? You cannot force yourself to be a superstar or a sandbox. It happens to you based on reader response. And I think the reason I want to talk about this is I'm seeing, and again, like the turnover in the author community is so significant because we are all throwing strategies and tactics at the wall, or we're trying to be very smart, doing the strategies that very successful or very smart people do, but we don't actually know if that's going to grow our platform. And so when we are promised that it will, and we do the work and then it doesn't, we get frustrated. So part of why I want to talk about growth engines this spring and this summer is to be able to have conversations about how to create resilience in your author career so that you don't become one of the, I can only do this for 3 years and then I have to give up because I just can't function in this career anymore. And so the 3 years is the average, right? I would like to see us be authors for life. So I want to talk about why different platforms grow and what it is that causes the different platforms to grow. And that's what these growth engine videos are going to be about. So I did a little bit of an intro to it last time, so I'm not going to recover a ton of ground, but there were enough questions both in the newsletter, in on social media pages, and on the YouTube video itself. There were enough questions that I felt like I needed to come back and do a little bit more of a 101 about what I mean when I say things like platform growth and what I mean when I say, these are the four engines and here's what's causing the growth. Because just like a particular vehicle, like a particular car, there is an engine that's inside of your platform. And your platform as an author is everything that you do to try to sell books. It's the platform that you stand on. So when I'm talking about your author platform, I'm talking about all of the things that you do to sell your books. That might be publishing, it might be advertising, it might be promotion, it might be marketing. It might be social media, it might be your newsletter. There are tons of things that you could potentially do trying to get visibility for your books. The platform that we stand on, or the platform that we are creating to stand above, right, so that we can get at the readers, is a vertical experience. We're trying to grow a bigger and bigger and bigger platform. And there are certain things, is a certain fuel that when you put that fuel in the engine of your platform, it is more likely to grow. So, one of the things I think we get really wrong in terms of when we are looking at what other people are doing is we don't have a sense for what is making their platform grow. And to be fair, I don't think we need to understand it from a perspective of I don't necessarily want you to be too worried about what other people are doing. What I'm trying to do in this video is to convince you to focus, narrow your attention, be less present in places that are trying to get you to do 1,000 things, and try to hone in on what's actually going to make your platform grow and what's going to make the readers come to you, what's going to make visibility and discoverability happen for you. And so when we're talking about platform growth engines, I'm talking about the very specific way in which your engine is constructed that is going to create more growth inside your platform. And here is the frustrating part. I just want to get all the bad news out of the way at the beginning, right? Here's the frustrating part. You don't get to choose this. I said that before. And it will likely be a slow process. So while a lot of us have a lot of urgency, and I'm going to encourage us, if we have too much urgency, to try to look at the place that urgency is coming from and consider getting some support around that. Because if I'm feeling too urgent, like I have people who will come up to me at conferences and I call them flappers, right? Where it's like they're flapping their hands so much, there's so much urgency, and they don't even understand that they're doing it most of the time, but they're feeling so tense and anxious that they need to try to impart to me how important it is that they start selling or else. And anytime there is an or else attached to I have to sell or else, it becomes an unsustainable situation. So I need to impart to you, if I can, and this is part of the author for life concept, the importance of creating stability and security in your life is so significant. When you feel yourself getting to this flapping place where you're like, I have to, or else, that is a place where creativity goes to die. So the more urgent you are feeling in a way that actually is anxiety and not in a way that is like, I'm excited, this is fun. That kind of place is still a low stakes place. You can still have a lot of creativity in that space. But when you get into a space where there's too much urgency and it has to grow or else, we don't take into account one of the fundamental principles of author platform growth engines, which is that they function at their own speed. And if we are not willing to be in this for as long as it takes to get the momentum, to move the needle, to get the forward progress, et cetera, and create the inertia that's going to move the platform higher and higher, then we are going to struggle because that anxiety, that flapping anxiety is a danger zone. That is not a sustainable place for us. And when we're in that place, my best suggestion is always do something else to produce income so that the feeling of anxiety can go away for the time being and your creativity can blossom again. Because if we don't have blossoming creativity, then we are not going to be able to sustain this job. And we will not be authors for our lifetime because the stress will become too great on our system. And eventually we will have to stop, which again, if you have to stop for a time because you need to create stability in your home, your family, your internal self, that's not a bad thing. So I'm working with somebody right now who is producing a book about sustainability that is all about the brain, the author brain that we function with, and the ways in which if we don't create security in some kind of habitual something, and I don't mean daily habits or any of that stuff. I just mean we need consistency and security because if we don't do that, we're not going to be able to have that baseline of creativity functioning. And the more stressed out we get, the less creative we get, which is again one of the reasons that I keep saying to people, please stay off of social media, even if you feel like you need to be informed all the time, because we absolutely cannot function creatively if we don't have security and space and peace. So part of what I'm trying to do in the platform growth engines, and the reason that I'm kind of reiterating some of this baseline stuff, is because I feel like when I explain things and I am not clear enough about either the purpose or the function at the beginning, we often see a lot of frustration about that. And I want to try to calm some of that frustration because in the platform growth engine concept, the hope is to produce security that I can find a way to grow this at some point by feeding it the thing, the fuel that it needs in order to grow. And if that fuel is content, which is the first question, right? So I have kind of a decision tree in my head about the way that platform growth engines work. Every single person, with a few exceptions, but they will know who they are. Every single person starts out with it's probably going to be content that grows my platform. And then as you continue to put the content out, you will eventually either continue to be a content platform, which are what the laboratory and the respawn are about. And we'll talk about that in a second. Or you will realize that you are a superstar platform, that you are growing because of who you are as a person. And you're growing because your readers want more of you and they want to consume more of you and who you are. Or you find out that you're growing because you actually have created the sandbox that readers want to play around in. So, what we can't do in this is think either this is personality relevant because it isn't. And I have to say that multiple times. This will not bear relevancy to your personality other than that there are some of us who probably would be happier being superstars because of our personality. There might be some of us who would be happier being sandboxes or being laboratories or respawns because of our personality, for sure. Like the more introverted you are, the more uncomfortable you're going to be if you end up with a superstar platform. The more extroverted you are, the more comfortable you're going to be if you have a superstar or a sandbox platform, right? So, and that is because the food of growth for those platforms tends to be a lot of public attention. But if you have a platform that doesn't require public attention in order to grow, and this is so important, this first question, all of us begin the research and development phase of our careers when we are first starting in the content area somewhere. So when we are a content driven platform, we are either the laboratory that is just kind of experimenting around with everything and trying to figure out what they like and maybe never really committing to one genre, but sometimes they do. But when they do, they usually commit to one at a time, not just one forever, right? Like unless they're yeah, anyway, that's it. We'll get to that in a second. But that content driven platform means that the readers are coming for the books. The books are the thing that they want to consume from you. So spending too much time trying to grow all of these other things, especially if we're trying to grow in public facing spaces or in spaces that are too generative of reader experience outside of the books, then we are going to not be able to produce growth in those areas. And the earlier you are in your platform, the more we need to focus on the content driving the growth of the platform and not try and focus on public attention growing it, public perception growing it, fan engagement growing it, etc. It's not that you can't still have fan engagement. It's not that you can't still have some social media if you want it, but there's a big, big difference between authors whose platform grows because they put books out and authors whose platform grows because they do Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Facebook, Twitter, right? Blue Sky. There is a huge difference between how you invest your time when you are a person whose public persona creates engagement in your platform and makes people want more of your content, more of your books, and when you are not. Because when you are not that person, and most of us who are in these content driven platforms for a long time, like people who've been in them for 10, 12, 15 years now, they would really prefer to be there. They don't want to be in those other places, and it's uncomfortable for them. Those of us who've been in these content driven platforms and we are frustrated with it because we would like to have one of the others, then the way to get one of the others is to produce content that will propel you into that space. And a lot of us who have content driven platforms, those laboratories and respawns, we want a sandbox. But the question for growth, and this is important, we keep coming back to the growth part of this. The question for growth is what is actually going to produce people coming into your platform? What is going to make your platform grow? And for most of us in the content driven platform, the ways that our fans, like our super fans, are functioning with us is not consistent with the way that a sandbox platform functions, where if you give them access to something, they will create all of their own stuff with it. They get really excited. They want to make conferences out of your content. They want to make avatars. They want to do fan fiction, things like that, right? Like that's what sandbox platforms grow because of. But when your platform only grows if you put new books out, then trying to focus on creating all of this fan engagement is fine for keeping your current community involved. And you can definitely do a few sandboxy feeling things that will keep your current community invested. And I would think about the social things in that way as well, in terms of like, we don't want to spend too much time on it because we do want to engage the current fans, but we are talking about growth of platform. This is how you get more and more readers. And in content driven platforms, and again, depending on whether you are that laboratory, which is the more experimental, let me see how this works. I think this is fun. They tend to be a little bit more um, fingers in lots of pots kind of things, right? Whereas when you have a spawn respawn platform, which is a video gaming term, not a biological term, but the spawn respawn platform is very much more like, I really want this to take off and work and this specific thing, and I'm going to focus my attention and energy on making this one specific thing work, and I'm going to keep doing it until I know it doesn't work, and then I'm going to respawn and start something new. And we see people do this a lot in spawn respawn platforms where they are trend chasing. That tends to be a spot that happens. It's not the only spawn respawn, because that can be like a 3 Enneagram space. It can be a high competition or highest significance space. It can be a high focus space, just trying to focus on that content production, that book production. And then everything else becomes a distraction. This is what's important, I think, about understanding what grows your platform. Most of us, the first question, right, is, am I a content driven platform or something else? And thank you so much to Roland for giving me that question. As we were having a conversation about it, about why the first video that I made didn't land. And I'm like, what's going on here? And he's like, well, I think you'd need to explain from the ground up, sort of like where do people enter the content? And so I was like, yeah, you're right. The first question is really, am I a content driven platform or not? Am I a book production is going to grow my platform platform or am I something else? And that's a question that most of us can't answer early because we haven't produced enough to be able to look backwards and see whether or not we are a superstar or a sandbox. And those are the questions that I was struggling with the most when we introduced this a couple of years ago at the Publish Better Faster conference that we do in the summers. Um, and a lot of the questions were like, I think that I might be this, but I don't know. And then I said, here's a way to experiment, which is what we're going to talk about later. And we'll talk about this more in the conference this year as well. But when I get into the individual platforms, I wanted to do just a step one, am I a content driven platform or not, is the question. But I wanted to do that first because that is really the big question. We can't answer that question sometimes until we get far enough in. So we need to start doing experiments on our platform growth that focus on producing content as a growth mechanism and not trying to focus on doing like 50,000 social media channels and having 100 TikToks and doing all of these things, like trying to make this happen. You want the content to produce the growth itself. Yes, you may want to resource your fans. You may want to be present on TikTok if you love it, or on Instagram if you love it. But doing social media as a primarily content driven platform is something that you need to really want to do if you're going to do it. Because again, looking at the big picture, very few people, and I would consider them to be outliers, they're few enough. Very few people can grow on social media when they hate social media, because that hatred comes across when you're making content, and that hatred comes across when you are trying to grow your social platforms, right? Not just the author platform. Social platforms are only one part of that. But anyway, so this is the first initial question. If you are not far enough into your platform growth yet in the number of books that you're producing, then you're not going to be able to even think about being a superstar or a sandbox yet, because you don't know, is my platform going to grow by other things or not? So here's what I'm going to suggest that you do, and this is your sort of action point. If you don't want to learn anything else about this and all you want to do is try to narrow down your decision making, here's what I want you to do, assuming that you're a content driven platform. So, whether you are the laboratory who experiments a lot, or whether you are the respawn who goes all the way in one direction to see if it will succeed, and then if it fails, you start over again, right? And you might do a couple of things on the side, but primarily you're focusing most of your attention on one thing, like one series, one trend, one genre, etc. That becomes almost your obsession. It's like, I've got to throw everything I can into this and see if I can make it work. And some respawns don't respawn for 5 or 6 years, right? But they are very much headed in that direction. So if you are a content driven platform, we need to increase our ability to have patience with this industry. We want to do some reasonable things to create discovery and visibility. Yes. We want to minimize the amount of time we try to spend doing a ton of social stuff and a ton of sandbox style, right? Like resource my readers and create a lot of experiences for my readers, etc. And I want to prioritize and spend 80% of my time doing things that are either directly book related, right? Where I may spend some of my time advertising, I may spend some of my time doing newsletters, etc. And that's part of the 20 to, let's say, 20 to 40%. I would love to see most content driven platforms spend 60 or more percent of their time writing, and then allow us to have the long-term time, right? Like over time, to let the platform grow because of the content that we produce. It is going to be a long game. And as we do either more content on the Quitcast, or when we do this author platform growth summit over the summer, my goal is to try to provide more and more information and resources about how to do this effectively. But I am going to also create more content on the Quitcast. My goal is to do one video for each one of the four growth engines and to give you a sense for what that looks like and kind of how to decide what's going on. When I first started, I wanted to start with the sandboxes because it feels to me like was the easiest way to explain the growth engine concept. But I think I'm actually going to start with the content-driven platforms because that's where most of us will be. And a lot of this content, the specific focus on content is about creating more books or creating more novellas or stories or whatever for the readers to consume to let them have the experience that they want of reading a book, because this is what most readers are here for. They don't necessarily want, not all readers are experiential, not all readers are social, but all readers are readers. So I would love to see you, if you feel like a more content driven person, to spend more than 50%. I would prefer 80, but more than 50 or 60% of your time on the actual books. Please back away from all the shoulds and all the things that you think you're supposed to be doing, unless you are so excited about doing them that you're like, I'm going to fight with you on this one, Becca, because I really want to spend 50% of my time on TikTok. I'm like, excellent, go for it. Please feel free to do it if you love it, but don't do it because you feel like you have to. Because what's going to eventually grow your platform, if you are in this first segment, is the content itself. So that's what platform growth engines are all about. What is growing your platform? Is it the books themselves primarily, or are readers feeding on something besides the books to grow the platform? So are you growing because of who you are as a person, or are you growing because of this world you've created? And not everyone who writes a big world is going to be a sandbox. Not everybody who writes a lot of characters is going to be a sandbox. Not every woo is going to be a superstar. Not every two or three or four Enneagram is going to be a superstar. Some nines are going to be superstars, and they are going to hopefully, this is as even as I'm thinking about it, I'm like, yes, I know a nine who wants to be a superstar and would really enjoy it. And I think he actually would really enjoy it. But so it's not necessarily personality predictive at all. What is going to happen is, what do readers latch onto that is going to grow your platform? And most of us are book related growth. So if you get nothing else out of this video, most of us need to spend more time writing and less time doing all of the other crap that we think we should be doing in order to grow the platform, because it may take us a longer amount of time to gain momentum as a laboratory, because it is a slow growth pattern with laboratories and respawns at first. But also, once you hit the tipping point and you find a way to narrow in on the readers that are really going to be your readers, it will be easier to grow in the future. But we have to remember that it will be easier in the future. Even if it's hard right now, it is worth going through, because the other option is not doing it. Right? Because if you are not a superstar, you're not going to be able to grow like a superstar grows. If you are not a sandbox, if you don't have a sandbox platform, you are not going to be able to grow at the levels you need to grow at by doing all of this sandboxy stuff, by trying to create a lot of stuff for your readers to engage in, and a lot of world building things, and a lot of opportunities for them to engage with you as a person, et cetera, et cetera. So, first job as a result of this is to spend significantly more time writing, most of us, unless you already know that you're a sandbox or a superstar, and then we will talk about you later. But so this is just the first episode. We're going to do several of these over the coming weeks. The Author Platform Growth Summit isn't happening until July, so we'll have time to get through all of these. Thank you to everybody who asked questions. I appreciate that. I'm going to collect some of them and answer them in the summit. Some of them I answered in the comments on the YouTube channel. Some of them I'll answer on the Patreon. But I do want to do more and more of this content, because I feel like resourcing us as authors for the future is partly about helping us make good decisions about how to spend our time, and spending our time doing things that are the most likely to produce the growth that we want in as short an order as possible. And for most of us, I mean, I would venture to say more than 90%. But for most of us, that growth is going to come from doing more writing, writing more books. And I don't mean writing faster than you can write. I don't mean forcing yourself to try to get books out more quickly. I literally just mean that the growth is going to happen when you release more material for people to read, because that's what they're here for from you. Okay. More content coming later. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate all of you and I appreciate the feedback as always, because it helps me to get better at communicating when I understand where my enthusiasm is going off the rails. I have such a hope that this information will help some of us to feel more secure in taking a slower growth path, because we can intellectualize at least that there is a higher likelihood that we will continue to grow if we allow ourselves to have patience and do the work. And I know not all of us, well, not all of us, I know none of us really like being patient, but it's going to happen. We've got to be patient with this process, especially as we enter another disruption in the industry. So we've got to be patient with the process and make sure that we are doing what is in us to do. So who am I and what is in me to do is a big question. And then how I am going to grow, again, for most of us, is writing more books. So close this, go open the manuscript, jump into the book, and I'll see you in the next quick cast, everybody. All right. Bye.